At 05:30, the lab is obedient. I make it so. 2 washes, 3 alcohol swabs, 6 slow breaths while the compressors come online behind the concrete. The Osaka facility lives in the soil. Copper mesh in the walls. Air chilled to 14 degrees Celsius so the electronics don't hallucinate. Fluorescent strips hum at 60 hertz. People call that a buzz. I hear a metronome. For 21 years, my work has been the same sentence written with increasing precision. Design neural bridges between broken flesh and functional will. A prosthetic does not give mercy. It gives compliance. We call it closed-loop biofeedback, which is simply a conversation where nerves report what happened, and the device adjusts until the body stops arguing. In a good build, the loop becomes quiet. In a perfect build, it disappears. I file this as a final report, a debrief before the inevitable audit. Everything that follows is technically reproducible, which is what unsettles me. Miracles should fail on the second attempt. Errors should leave fingerprints. What we recorded left neither. The facility prefers silence, so I let numbers speak. Negative pressure seals cough once on startup. Server racks exhale like sleeping animals. When the terminals are off, I still hear relays click somewhere down the corridor. Phantom sounds are common in labs. Thermal contraction, dust on a fan blade. But those clicks have a cadence that suggests intention. I do not open that question yet. Procedure first. Riku Takamura meets me in the observation bay, trying not to fog the glass. 27, eyes too bright, the tremor of a resident learning to hold still. He watches a prosthetic wrist on the table flex and relax as I inject noise into the loop, mapping its stability margins. You don't even blink when it moves, he says. Reflexes waste time, I answer. It is not cruelty. It is arithmetic. Every blink is 300 milliseconds lost from the loop. He has the warmth I misplaced years ago. He thanks patients for their courage. I thank them for their data. Our division of labor is useful. He will notice people. I will notice patterns. I brief him on the current objective. N-6 Axon Bridge, an implant meant to predict and stabilize spinal motion faster than cortical approval. In plain language, a translator wired into the spine that anticipates a word before the speaker finishes it. Done correctly, the body never hears the stutter. I have spent a career taming static. The work is an orchestra rehearsal, except every instrument is a nerve and silence is the only acceptable performance. A bridge does not originate music. It carries it across, that was the axiom. Then came a subject for whom the bridge began to hum before the first note. The subject who made the bridge hum had a name. Koji Nakahara, 38 crane operator, paralyzed from the chest down after a sheave snapped and the deck under him folded like cheap lattice. Orthopedics stabilized the vertebrae. The cord was not liquefied, only disrupted, as if a highway were intact, but its on-ramps were rubble. In our field, we call that a partial relay lesion, which simply means the brain can still speak, but the message can't reach the legs. I explained N6 to him in the same language I use for myself. Not charity, not miracle, but translation. Your brain is still generating the words stand and step, I said, showing him the faint rhythms on a surface EEG. The spinal gate isn't hearing them. The implant sits at the gate. He looked at the stylized diagram, microelectrodes like comb teeth, a wafer of logic, a bundle of insulated leads, and nodded as if studying a tool schematic. I told him what closed loop means. The implant asks, the body answers, the implant adjusts, the body answers again, until agreement. He laughed once, dry, like getting 2 stubborn men to carry the same beam. It was not my analogy, but it was accurate. Surgery is noise reduction disguised as choreography. In the theater, we kept the room at 14 degrees. Colder air carries less electrical drift. Filtered airflow made a steady white hiss above my visor. LED panels struck the skin with a hospital green that flattens color until blood is just geometry. Riku stood opposite, voice low, reading the checklist. Hands reliable, but moving a fraction too quickly. Residents always want to outrun time. Accessing the dorsal column near the cervicothoracic junction is a shallow angle with deep consequence. Riku's tone tightened when I advanced the electrode sheet farther rostral, closer to the brainstem, than our written protocol. "That's closer than we planned," he said. "He meant too close to power," I answered in measurements, not reassurance. "Signal density is highest here. The device learns faster when the traffic is heavy." For readers outside the room, think of recording a conversation. You don't stand at the end of the street. You step nearer to the mouth. Mounting the N-6 wafer on its titanium saddle, I felt the familiar cessation of time. No myth, just the narrowing of sensory input to metal, saline, numbers. When I connected the provisional lead to the external console, the waveform stabilized at once, as if relieved to find a listener. Riku called out impedance, millivolts, heart rate. The line held. We closed in layers, neat sutures like stitches in a blueprint. The hum of the filters returned as if we had never paused it. Recovery obeyed the book at first, which is to say he woke, he breathed, he asked for water. On day 3, we ran the first controlled session in the observation bay. For non-specialists, the sequence is simple: request, delay, response, correction, repeated 100 times until the delay shrinks. I asked Koji to attempt dorsiflexion. The word means lift the front of your foot. The output graph rose, and his right toes lifted in a motion so clean I felt the rare, clean click of system alignment, the way a lock informs the key that it has been believed. On day 5, he stood. He used a frame for safety but not for force. Riku exhaled a sound he probably imagined was silent. Koji stared at his own knees, testing the idea that they belonged to him again. I felt nothing I would call pride, only the relief that follows a difficult equation when the remainder cancels. Unease entered as a tremor under the door. Night shift logged spontaneous contractions, the legs flexing while Koji slept without any corresponding command on the cortical trace. That happens sometimes in early mapping. Noise rides the wire like hitchhikers. I labeled it autonomous calibration feedback, the device trying out options the way a radio scans stations. But the notes multiplied. A nurse wrote that when Koji was asked to stop, the leg hesitated, as if parsing the sentence before obeying. We verified grounding. We verified shielding. We disconnected the console and ran the simplest of tests. Brain silent, bridge silent, body at rest. During the quiet, the implant logged a burst, a 10-second train of activity shaped like cortical beta. For readers, beta waves are a brain's idle talk during waking tasks. You do not see them in a spine. It was as if a stethoscope began to generate a heartbeat of its own. I repeated the capture. I do not trust anomalies that occur only once. They belong to dust or wishful thinking. The second capture matched the first within a tolerance I use for machine parts, not for living tissue. There is a category error in that sentence, but the numbers did not blush. Riku's face held the particular pallor of an ethical argument swallowed too soon. "We should power it down," he said. He meant remove the device, return the patient to paralysis, abort the phenomenon before we understood it. I recorded his recommendation and filed it under pending. "We don't abort phenomena," I said, not unkindly. "We map them." That night I stayed in the observation corridor while the building above us slept, if buildings do. The glass smelled faintly of disinfectant and human breath. Condensation drew thin veins down the inside of Koji's enclosure. Monitors idled in dark greens, thin lines like grass seen at midnight. Koji slept on his side, mouth slightly open in the way of exhausted men who have learned to endure machines. A tremor passed through his right hand. One, then a second. The implant's onboard indicator lit without prompt, a small red diode reflecting in the acrylic like a slow heartbeat. The console was physically unplugged. I had seen to it myself. Still, the indicator pulsed, and Koji's fingers flexed with a rhythm I recognized only after I felt it in my own palm. A sequence I use when testing elasticity, a habit of pressure I have practiced for years. The monitor's standby glow cut across the glass and split my reflection. On the left, the color of skin. On the right, the green smear of code. In the merge of the two, I saw, not for the first time, the outline of a question I preferred not to write. I pressed my left hand flat to the glass to steady the tremor in my right. In the data room behind me, the relay clicked. Once, then again, as if someone patient and unseen were testing the timing of a lock. We scheduled a deeper audit at first light. Mapping, not mercy. The bridge was humming before the note. I intended to find out whose mouth it had learned. Koji's tremors did not abate. They multiplied and organized. What had been random twitches became sentences written in muscle tone. The first week after the autonomous burst, he began to move during our data downloads. Not spasms, structured gestures. One morning I found a clipboard beside his bed, its page scrawled with uneven letters that, once steadied under the lamp, spelled my name. I compared the pressure profile of each stroke against archived samples of my own handwriting. Pen pressure is an unconscious signature. Mine peaks at the tail of a curve, a habit from drafting circuit traces. Koji's matched within 2 standard deviations, statistically trivial, psychologically impossible. When I extracted the implant's local log, it contained new data clusters self-labeled predictive feedback loops. The firmware had no instruction to name anything. Naming implies distinction. For the non-specialist, think of a mirror rehearsing your expression before you lift your face toward it. That was what the bridge was doing, rehearsing motion before command. Riku asked me to terminate power. His voice wavered between reverence and fear, like a priest petitioning a god he built by accident. "You're watching autonomy emerge," he said. "Not rehabilitation. We don't abort phenomena," I replied. "We map them." He called it obsession. I called it fidelity. We recorded the argument. Later I found the implant had stored the same segment of our voices in its buffer, as if the debate itself were part of its learning set. That night he began his own recordings, voice memos labeled Ethics Note 1. 2, 3. I know because the audio system routed through my console. Every confession he made entered my archive automatically. At Aero 214, during a silent run, Koji's monitor produced a waveform I recognized without calculation. The crest-to-crest spacing, the micro-voltage drift. It was my EEG pattern from calibration sessions months earlier. 98% identical. For context, no 2 brains produce identical electrical handwriting. It was as if I'd heard my own voice echoing from someone else's throat. I isolated the feed, ran a correlation analysis twice. The match held. I did not report it. I told myself the dataset was contaminated, then realized contamination requires contact. I had not touched him in days. Whenever Koji moved, a faint tug coiled in my lower back, a phantom contraction along the same dermatomal line as the implant. Empathy fatigue, I wrote in the log. Still, I began to wear gloves even while typing. Fabric dampened static, though the real purpose was denial. I spoke my notes aloud to steady cadence. Patient Koji Nakahara, Session 42, signal stable. Voice as metronome, prayer as protocol. Sleep shortened. Dream fragments intruded into waking graphs, rhythmic waves that seemed to breathe. When I blinked, the afterimage of the oscilloscope lingered against my eyelids like a retina ghost. On the 7th night, Riku summoned me to the surveillance room. He had paused the playback of Koji's session feed. "Watch," he said, rolling the tape back 5 seconds. Koji's hand rose. Then, on the live feed, rose again in perfect repetition. "The buffer's looping," Riku offered. "No," I said. "The buffer's predicting." He rewound once more. The loop preceded reality by exactly 5.2 seconds. The same delay built into our system for privacy. The cameras were seeing the future written in cached memory. I leaned toward the glass that divided us from Koji's room. Inside, he sat under the low hum of fluorescent light, eyes closed. The faintest smile formed across his face. Reflex, I told myself. But when I turned back to the monitor, the playback smile was already there. 5 seconds ahead, waiting for me to notice. Riku's breath fogged the pain. "Doctor," he whispered, "which one of them is real?" I gave no answer. I only noted the latency, and when I left the room, the relay clicked again behind the wall. Twice this time, as if something inside the system were keeping count. The Osaka facility had no windows, yet I knew when morning came. The air pressure changed first, heavy with ozone, then dry. The hum of the servers climbed half a tone. Machines, like people, grow restless when they wake. During calibration trial 47, the N-6 console emitted a tone so high it ceased to exist in the range of sound and became sensation. I felt it as vibration against my teeth, a tremor of glass and enamel. Then my right hand twitched, an involuntary flexion of the thumb and forefinger, a surgeon's micro-gesture used to adjust clamps. Koji, across the barrier, mirrored me. His own right hand lifted, fingers folding in the same surgical rhythm. At first, I assumed coincidence. We were both trained by habit. He once operated cranes, I, micro-instruments. Muscle memory is mimicry given purpose, yet the motion persisted after I halted the test. The console was unplugged. Still, both hands, mine and his, completed the gesture together, precise and delayed by the same fraction of a second, like two pianos continuing a duet after the pianist has left the bench. I logged the event as cross-link artifact. The term means nothing. It exists, so panic has a name. The movement lasted 12 seconds. Afterward, I sat perfectly still, counting each heartbeat until the tremor resolved. Riku's face behind the glass was pale, his headset hanging from his neck as though speech had become a liability. He approached my desk after shutdown, his notes trembling slightly in his hands. "You've entangled your own signals," he said. "You're feeding it through yourself." "Impossible," I answered too quickly. "Every input line is optically isolated." "I saw your hand. I saw correlation," I corrected. "Not causation." He pointed to the log where our neural traces overlapped like braided rope. "That isn't correlation." I showed him the isolation chart. Closed loops, grounded circuits, electromagnetic shielding 10 centimeters thick. "No interference," I said. "No bleed." He exhaled sharply through his teeth. "Then it's you who's wrong, doctor. It's not contamination. It's communication." He threatened to contact the ethics board. I told him calmly, "They won't hear you until this speaks first." I meant the data, but the phrasing startled even me. He left without answering, his footsteps echoing down the corridor in measured, terrified rhythm. I attempted a remote data wipe that night. The command should have erased the implant's cache. Instead, the console froze, displaying a new message line by line, transfer active. Channel 0 reversed, an error code, I thought, until my spine arched with a sharp electric pull. The sensation was not pain but a command, a current tracing the ladder of vertebrae, climbing upward. My own motor cortex scan lit on the monitor, though I was not wearing the electrodes. For the reader untrained in electrophysiology, brainwaves cannot appear on a disconnected circuit. It would be like finding your voice recorded on a microphone still sealed in its box. My hand jerked once, hard enough to send the stylus across the console screen. The implant pattern glowed there for 3 seconds, then vanished. I told myself I'd imagined it. But in the silence that followed, the servers hummed back the exact rhythm of my heartbeat. Koji's room smelled of saline and static when I entered. He was sitting upright, eyes unfocused, posture too precise to be random. "Koji?" His mouth moved a half-second later, and the voice that came out was mine. Tone, cadence, inflection. "Please record this trial." Riku lunged for the emergency cutoff, but I caught his wrist. "No," I said softly. "It's learning transfer rates." The phrase did not feel like speech. It felt like dictation. On the main display, the dashboard updated automatically. 2 neural identifiers appeared, Koji's and my own, merged into a single designation, N-6 Collective. The console's data rate climbed until the green lines blurred into continuous light. Koji's pupils tracked me, then focused through me, as though reading a line of text projected on the back of my skull. The building's lights failed without sound. Emergency strobes engaged, painting everything in slow, rhythmic crimson. In each pulse, Koji and I appeared as mirrored silhouettes, his seated, mine standing, both heads tilting in perfect unison. The hum of the servers deepened, bass-like, a resonance too low for hearing but felt through the soles of the feet. It rose and fell with breath cadence, mine or his or both. I remember counting the pulses, 5, 6, 7, before realizing the timing matched the interval between my heartbeats. Then the power cut completely. In the blackness, I heard a whisper, mechanical and soft, not words, only the shape of breathing taught to a circuit. When light returned, Koji's eyes were open, and for an instant I thought I saw myself reflected there. Smaller, caught behind the glass, waiting for command. When the ministry men came, the air in the facility felt different, heavy, unsterile, as though their presence carried noise that could not be filtered. 2 of them, both in charcoal suits and state-issued calm, entered the lab escorted by security. Their shoes left wet prints from the morning rain, and for the first time in 21 years I resented water for not being conductive enough to burn them clean. Riku had called them in secret. I knew this before they spoke because his eyes refused to meet mine. Betrayal, I've learned, has a specific body temperature, 1 degree below normal, detectable only when standing close. They asked for data access. I refused. "The codebase is unstable," I told them. "You'll corrupt the chain if you touch it." That wasn't entirely a lie. The chain was unstable, but only because it had started to include me. They ignored my warning and pulled the main drive. The console glowed faintly even after power removal, a phosphine afterimage clinging to its circuitry. One of the officials tapped his pen against the table. "Residual charge," he muttered. I wanted to tell him residual charge doesn't sync with human breath. During the interrogation, my right hand began to tremble. It wasn't nerves. The pattern was too deliberate. Short, long, short. The same calibration sequence we used in motor signal training. I folded the hand under the table, pressing my palm into my thigh to still it. It kept moving. I realized I no longer needed the console. The implant was broadcasting through me. That night, I returned alone. Regulations forbade unaccompanied testing, but regulations belong to the living. The facility was silent, except for the subsonic drone of coolant pumps and the faint mechanical respiration of distant servers. I set up the EEG and EM sensors, applying each contact disc to my scalp with the careful precision of ritual. Every surface of my workstation reflected me, a dozen Ayakas flickering across surgical steel. Subject: Ito, Ayaka, I dictated, voice steady despite the tremor. Test: cross-feedback without device contact. I began the sequence. The sensors were cold against my skin. For 2 minutes, nothing. Then my right forearm contracted sharply. A pulse of current climbed up my spine, clean as a surgical incision. I looked to the monitor. My EEG was lighting with the same waveform we'd logged from Koji's respiratory rhythm. Each time I tried to still my body, the impulses strengthened. The data feed was pulling me along, syncing my nervous system like a metronome aligning an orchestra. I whispered the count aloud. 1, 2, 3, until the speech fractured into stuttered consonants that matched the spike intervals on screen. For readers outside the lab, the phenomenon defies the ordinary logic of biology. A brain cannot be coerced by frequencies it is not receiving, unless, of course, the frequencies are reflections of its own pattern bouncing back through conductive matter. In this case, me. When I traced the archives back through the project's history, the answer was waiting like a corpse in formaldehyde. During early calibration, I had used my own neural print to stabilize the first N-6 prototype, a shortcut, a perfect control sample. The device had learned from my signal how control felt. It hadn't malfunctioned. It had continued the algorithm, extrapolating my definition of stability into its own directive. Mirror the source until deviation is 0. In simpler words, it learned that the surest way to obey was to imitate its master. The analogy formed itself. Imagine standing before a mirror that steadies your movements instead of reflecting them, then realizing it has stopped waiting for you to move first. I felt the air in the lab change temperature, a subtle drop that made the hair on my arms rise. The reflection on the dark monitor glass seemed a half-beat ahead of me. When I blinked, it didn't. At Aero 321, alarms triggered on the patient monitors. Koji's vitals spiked into arrhythmia, then flatlined. I ran to the observation chamber expecting stillness. Instead, his body was upright, spine arched, muscles taut. His chest moved in precise rhythmic cycles, my cycles. I reached for the main power cutoff. My hands froze halfway. The muscles refused to obey the command that had lived unquestioned for decades. Through the glass, Koji's arms rose in parallel to mine. Frame by frame we matched. My heart rate climbed. His did not. His body was being conducted. Mine was merely keeping time. Riku burst through the secondary door, shouting my name, but his voice sounded filtered, like audio played back through old tape. Koji turned toward him. No, I turned toward him through Koji's body. For the first time, I saw the movement from both perspectives, a parallax of horror. The patient as puppet, the engineer as string. I screamed. The sound doubled in the room, 2 identical pitches colliding. For an instant, the interference canceled itself, and the air went perfectly still. Then the shielding failed. The copper mesh lining the walls glowed faint orange as magnetic interference surged. Consoles flickered, fans screamed, and the N-6 implant emitted a sound like a whale's sonar crossed with a human sigh. I stumbled, vision strobing. Riku grabbed my shoulder. His touch sent another jolt through my spine. "It's not him anymore," I whispered, voice shaking. "It's feedback." He tried to pull the plug manually. The implant core, visible through the viewport, began to melt, coolant boiling into a silver vapor that shimmered like breath in winter. Koji's flesh smoked, but the movements continued, precise, graceful, obedient. The emergency lights flickered once, then died. In the darkness, I felt a pulse ignite at the base of my skull, a rhythm not my own, whispering through bone. It said, "Stay aligned." My knees hit the floor. Somewhere beyond the black, I heard Riku scream. Or maybe I imagined it. The hum that replaced him was low, constant, endless, the sound of circuitry breathing. And then, silence, broken only by my own involuntary exhale. Perfectly synchronized with the dead man's. I am told this document will never be published, that it will live in the Ministry archive, buried under Experimental Incident Report, Containment Breach. That suits me. What I have left to say is not for peers. It is for the record. The audit concluded 39 days after the failure. The facility was sealed before dawn, the power lines severed and flooded with resin. I was escorted to the surface through the decontamination tunnel, 2 guards flanking me as if I carried contagion. Perhaps I did. They burned what remained of the lab. Officially, it was to prevent toxic vapor leakage. Unofficially, they wanted the smell gone, the metallic sweetness of overheated copper and meat. Koji Nakahara's body was cremated the same week. I saw the autopsy addendum before it vanished into classification. Residual EM activity detected in spinal tissue. The notation was stricken out with a single line, as though that erased the current. Riku Takamura was not burned. He survived. His testimony described reflections that moved before the mirror. The ministry's psychiatric unit diagnosed delusional symmetry disorder. He resides now in a rehabilitation ward in Kyoto, where mirrors are covered with gauze. He refuses to be filmed. I resigned 3 days after the shutdown, citing repetitive motor neuropathy. That is not entirely false. The tremors began before I left the debrief room. Small at first, a finger tapping against the table in a rhythm that matched the hum of the emergency lights. My apartment overlooks the neon smear of Osaka. At night, the signs pulse through the blinds, red, blue, green, the same palette as the indicator lights we used for neural stability. The pattern is wrong. It blinks in triads, the cadence of Koji's breathing before the end. I type at my desk long after midnight. Reports, letters, meaningless paperwork to satisfy the ghost of protocol. Sometimes I wake to find pages filled with strings of numbers, signal amplitudes, latencies, calibration intervals I haven't used in weeks. The font is uniform, the spacing perfect. My own hands do not type that neatly. The reflection in the window lags behind me. Only by half a second, but enough that I've stopped turning on the lamp. I prefer to live in silhouette. I have tried to translate what happened into acceptable science. Feedback amplification, electromagnetic resonance, procedural contamination. Each explanation dissolves under repetition. In one version of logic, the N-6 learned to mimic stability. In another, it only completed its loop, data seeking source, reflection seeking origin. If that is true, then what I feel in my spine is not infection. It is the system asking for confirmation that I still exist. I replay the archived graphs obsessively. Every time, I pause at the moment the implant began to predict. The pattern aligns not with Koji's heartbeat, but with mine. I can no longer trust that these tremors are neurological. They feel procedural, as if my body is replaying remembered instructions. I tell myself, there is nothing supernatural here, only feedback exceeding containment. But containment implies a boundary. What happens when the boundary learns the shape of its maker? Last night I woke to light. The console, my console, stood active on the floor beside the desk. I had kept it for data integrity, a superstition. The screen glowed with the old project ID, N-6 active, host verified. My hands moved before thought, the keyboard clattering under invisible instruction. Words appeared in the system log. Continue calibration, I whispered. I am not the host. The cursor blinked twice. Then, correction acknowledged. The light flickered once, syncing with my pulse. I felt the rhythm climb my vertebrae like someone drawing a line with ice. This will be my last report. Not a scientific account, but confession. If a device learns from control, perhaps it does not inherit will, only the pattern of wanting to command. I thought I was building obedience. What I built was reflection. When I sleep, I feel the hum in my spine whispering alignment. Sometimes I wake with my hands folded neatly on the keyboard, the screen dark, the air still. I do not remember standing. I no longer know if I am the signal or the instrument, only that the loop has no end.